Hello, I'm Robert Stanier. I'm the vicar at St Andrews and St Mark's, Surbiton. I want to talk about the Pentecost story, the Holy Spirit coming, which in John's Gospel is called the Spirit of Truth. And I wanted to use that to look at both the Christian story, but also to examine truth and lies. And this week we've had a big example of kind of lies and cover-up in the Panorama, the analysis of the Panorama interview with Princess Diana. So I'm going to touch on that in the second half of the sermon. But I will start with the famous sentence within the Acts passage about what happened at the day of Pentecost. And they start preaching, these people from Galilee, and then what they notice is everyone can understand it in their own language. And there's this huge list of nations who are in Jerusalem at the time. You know, Phrygians, Pamphylia, residents of Mesopotamia, residents from Cyrene, but Medes, Elamites, kind of goes on and on and on. And they don't need to list every nation in the known world, but they kind of might as well have done, because that's the kind of thing that they're on about. And the point is, they can all understand this Christian message in their own tongue. And this is a kind of spiritual revolution, that any nation is no better than the other nations. Because previously, the Jews were the people who understood about monotheism. They were the first people to realise that. And the Jews at the time were not strong as a nation state. They were oppressed by the Romans. They were part of the Roman Empire. They didn't have their independence. But spiritually they were very strong, because if you wanted to find out about Jehovah, Yahweh, their God, you need to read Hebrew for starters. Whose language is that? That is their language. If you want to worship Yahweh, where do you go? You've got to go to Jerusalem, their capital. And where in Jerusalem you go, they will tell you it's their temple and such and such a place at such and such a time. So in terms of spiritual authority, the Jewish people have got it, and that is the kind of everyone. There's Gentiles, there's Jews, there's Gentiles, there's everyone else. Pentecost, whoosh, every nation can understand this story in their own way. No one nation is superior to anything else. It's a kind of new spiritual anarchy, and we can all access the truth. And the Spirit in John's Gospel is described as the Spirit of Truth. That's what Jesus is going to leave us with. And everyone will have to sit under that Spirit of Truth, wherever they're from. Now, so this is sort of big message. What gets in the way of us living in truth? And this is where I suppose it's worth examining, or it's fruitful to examine the Panorama Diana stuff, which has come out this week. Because on the surface, that's all about truth. You know, it's all about Diana telling the truth about the state of her marriage and stuff like that. But what's now emerged is that it was secured, the interview was secured by a journalist with this tissue of lies, including mocked up bank statements, lies about the security people being in the pay of News International. They were telling stories. There were lies about MI6. There were lies about named journalists. There's all sorts of lies. And he did that. Well, why was he doing that, Bashir? I guess he would think, well, I don't want to admit to it, but now I have had to. They were lies, but I was in the pursuit of the greater truth. Yeah, he was in pursuit of being a big journalist. You know, he was on the pursuit of the track of a big interview. But even so, what he does is mind-boggling. And actually so extreme. I don't think there are too many lessons for the rest of us, because it's just so extreme. I think that the greater lessons are really with the sort of BBC bigwigs who commissioned the report. Because I don't know if you followed it, but what happened a year afterwards, the graphic designer who had mocked up these bank statements for Bashir, thinking they were to do with some kind of surveillance project, got cold feet and thought, well, this is really peculiar, and maybe they were used to secure this interview by pretending they were real when I just mocked them up. And he goes to Panorama, and they have a kind of formal internal investigation. And they have a kind of get-out-free card, luckily, the BBC at the time, because Diana says she stands by every word of the interview. So that kind of gets them away with it. But even so, they could have asked more questions. It's like they deliberately avoid asking the questions that will lead them to the truth. And the truth being that Bashir made up all these things, falsified documents, committed terrible journalistic ethics in order to get the interview, to get that BBC employee to get an interview which they put on BBC and got the biggest viewing figures they'd ever had. It was all done in an incredibly dodgy, underhand way. And they really don't want that to be the case, because they are the BBC. And the BBC are at a different level. Yes, there are the other grubby tabloid journalists who do phone hacking, but we're not like that. We're the BBC, and we want to stay regarding ourselves as the BBC, who are a bit exalted and a bit above the others. And so they don't, they just kind of cut past it, and they manage to avoid asking the questions. They don't call up Charles Spencer. They don't do any of the proper calling up, and they get away with it for quite a long time. But what has persuaded them not to look for the truth, it is their sense of self-importance. And I think that is really interesting. Pentecost is partly about just stripping away self-importance of nations, self-importance of institutions, self-importance in terms of our personhood, if we're going to live in truth. Because eventually we're going to go in front of God, and that is the day of judgment. And so you can't have your own self-regard. God sees you for who you are. And whether you're an Elamite, a Parthian, a Mede, a Phrygian, a BBC journalist, someone who watches, the whole point is that we should live underneath that truth and don't let ourselves get distorted by our own self-perception of ourselves or of ourselves as an institution, and we lose track of the truth. That's the message for today.